Most people think haunted houses announce themselves with noise, with chaos, with something obvious. But the stories that stay with you are the quiet ones. When a house feels aware and you're the only one who notices. The stories you're about to hear are 100% true, verified through public records, documented timelines, and first-hand witness accounts. Some names have been changed for privacy, but every event you're about to hear actually happened. These are 3 scary night haunted house stories. Real experiences shared by people who lived through nights where doors moved on their own, footsteps stopped just outside bedroom walls, and silence felt intentional. Before we begin, hit like. It helps this story reach more horror lovers like you. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. You're part of my horror family, and I want to know where my family's watching from. Tell me which story hit you the hardest, and subscribe. Your support fuels this channel and helps bring even more terrifying true stories to light. Now, listen closely. I didn't rent the house because I liked it. I rented it because it was cheap. It was close enough to my job, and it didn't ask questions. After my last lease ended and my hours got cut at the warehouse in Charleston, I took what I could get. An overnight security position at a small distribution yard outside a town called Madison, tucked along a bend where the river runs dark and slow. The pay wasn't great, but the shifts were steady. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights a week. By the time everyone else was drinking coffee and starting their day, I'd already been awake for 8 hours, walking fence lines in fog and listening to trucks idle. The house was on the edge of town, past the last street light, where pavement turned to patched gravel and the woods started swallowing everything. If you stood on the porch, you could see a handful of porch lights down the road and then nothing. Just tree silhouettes and the pale blur of mist hanging in the hollow. The landlord met me once, handed me the key and left. No small talk, no tour. Just a quick nod and a look that said he'd rather not know who I was as long as I paid on time. Inside, the place smelled like damp plaster and old carpet. Not a rotten smell exactly, more like a wet coat that never dried. The living room had furniture that didn't match. A lumpy couch with cigarette burns, a coffee table with a corner chewed up like a dog had tried to eat it, and a recliner that leaned to one side. The walls were painted a tired beige, but the paint was bubbled in spots, like it had been slapped over water damage and forgotten. Upstairs was worse. The staircase was narrow and steep, with a railing that felt loose in your hand. Each step had its own creak, and the sound carried through the whole house. At the top was a short hallway, 2 bedrooms, and a small bathroom that smelled faintly of metal and mildew. The carpets up there were thin and worn, flattened into paths, like the house remembered where people used to walk. I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't here to feel at home. I was here to sleep during the day, work at night, and keep my head down until I could save enough to move somewhere that didn't feel like it had been abandoned on purpose. The first 2 weeks went by, the way hard times usually do, quiet, routine, and exhausting. I'd come home at dawn with my clothes smelling like cold air and diesel. Fog would still be sitting low on the yards, making the trees look like smudged charcoal. I'd kick off my boots, eat something simple, and climb upstairs to sleep while the world warmed up outside. Sometimes, in the afternoon, I'd wake to the sound of rain on the roof. Other times it was just the house settling, pipes ticking, boards shifting. Old houses make noises. They always have. My mom used to say, a house is like a person. When it gets older, it starts complaining. It wasn't until the third week that I noticed the pattern. It started as something so small, I almost didn't register it. I was downstairs around midnight on my night off, trying to reset my sleep schedule. I turned the TV on low just for the sound, the kind of late-night reruns that fill silence without demanding attention. Around 12:40, the upstairs floor creaked. Not the stairs, not the walls. A creak that sounded like weight, slow pressure, somewhere above the living room. I looked up instinctively, like the ceiling might give me an explanation. Nothing followed. No second step, no thump. Just that single, careful complaint from the wood. I told myself it was temperature. The heater kicked on, the boards expanded, the house shifted. A few nights later, it happened again. I'd come home from work early because a storm knocked power out at the yard. The house was dim, lit only by the kitchen light. Rain hissed against the windows and wind pushed through the trees with a low, steady moan. I stood in the living room with my dinner on a paper plate, and I heard it, soft movement upstairs. Not a stomp, not a rush, a slow pacing, like someone moving along the hallway and stopping, then moving again. The pauses were the worst part because they suggested choice, intent. I froze with my fork halfway to my mouth. The sound stopped, not faded, not drifted away. Stopped like it had been listening too. I set my plate down and walked to the staircase. The kitchen light didn't reach far, and the stars rose into darkness like a throat. "Hello?" I called, and my voice sounded wrong in that house, too loud, too thin. Silence. I stood there for a long minute feeling stupid. Then I climbed a few steps slowly, keeping my hand on the railing that wobbled under my grip. Nothing happened. No noise, no movement. The upstairs hallway was empty when I reached the top. Both bedroom doors were open. The bathroom door hung crooked on its hinges. The air smelled like damp carpet and old dust. I checked under the beds, like a kid who'd watched too many movies. I opened the closet. Empty hangers swayed slightly, though I hadn't touched them. I went back downstairs and told myself the only reason I was scared was because I'd been alone too long and tired too often. Your brain fills quiet spaces with threats when you give it nothing else to chew on. The next week, I started noticing what made it happen. It only happened when I turned the lights off. If I left the kitchen light on or the living room lamp, the house stayed quiet. The usual creaks, sure, but nothing that felt like pacing. The moment I shut everything down, when the rooms went dark and my own reflection started appearing in the windows, then it would begin. Soft steps, a slow shift, a creak in the upstairs hallway that traveled just enough to suggest a person moving carefully where the floor was strongest. And every time I looked at the staircase, every time I stood at the bottom and stared up into that dark, everything stopped. The silence didn't feel empty then. It felt held. One evening, I came home before sunset. Fog was already slipping between the trees, early and thick, and the hollow behind the house looked like it was filling with smoke. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, scrolling my phone, trying to ignore how the house seemed to lean inward when the light faded. In a drawer I hadn't opened before, I found an old photograph. It was creased and stained, like it had been handled too many times. A family stood on the porch. Man, woman, 2 kids. The house behind them was the same shape. but the porch looked sturdier, the yard less overgrown. What made my stomach tighten wasn't the family. It was the upstairs window. In the photo, the curtains were pulled back, and in the dark square of glass, there was the faint suggestion of a face. Pale, pressed close, like someone watching the picture being taken. I stared until my eyes watered, trying to convince myself it was just glare. That night, when I turned off the last light and the house went black around me, the pacing started upstairs, almost immediately. Slow, careful, patient. I stood at the bottom of the staircase, my hand on the first step, and I didn't move. The pacing stopped. And in the silence that followed, I realized something that made my throat go dry. The house wasn't settling. The upstairs boards were reacting to me, as if whatever was up there could hear the exact moment my eyes found the stairs. As if it knew when I was looking. I started sleeping with the lights on. Not all of them. Just enough to keep the house from feeling like it belonged to the dark. A lamp in the living room. The kitchen light cracked on low. Sometimes the bathroom light upstairs, so the hallway wasn't a solid tunnel. It worked in a way. The pacing stopped. But the quiet didn't get better. It got sharper, like the house was waiting for me to slip. By the end of that week, I was exhausted in a new way. Not from work, though the night shifts didn't help, but from the constant vigilance. The way you listen for things even when nothing is happening. The way your body stays braced, like it expects a hand on your shoulder. I told myself I needed proof, something real, something I could point to and say, see, I'm not imagining this. So on my next night off, I set my phone at the bottom of the stairs and hit record. Just audio. I didn't want video. I didn't want to see something I couldn't unsee. Then I turned off every light. The house went black so fast, it felt like a lid closing. I sat on the couch with my knees pulled up, staring at the staircase. Outside, rain drummed soft and steady, and the woods made those faint, untrustworthy sounds, branches shifting, leaves sliding, a distant animal, yip swallowed quickly by fog. For almost 10 minutes, nothing happened. My heart slowed down enough that I started to feel foolish. I thought maybe I'd finally pushed myself too far, that my brain was turning old house noises into something personal, just to keep me company. Then softly, the upstairs floor creaked. One step, a pause, another step. The pacing began, slow and careful, moving along the hallway above me. I could almost map it by the sound. Starting near the bathroom, drifting toward the bedroom, turning, coming back. I stared at the staircase until my eyes ached. The moment I leaned forward, as soon as I truly focused, everything stopped. Not a fade, not a final step, stopped. The silence that followed made me feel exposed, like I turned a corner and found someone standing there, not moving. My phone recorded for an hour. When I listened back the next day, the audio was mostly rain and the low hum of the fridge. But at the moment the pacing should have started, there was something else. A faint sound, almost too low to catch. Breathing, not mine. My breathing in the recording was sharp, close to the mic when I shifted on the couch. This sound was higher up, distant, thin, like someone exhaling through their nose at the top of the stairs, just out of reach of the phone. I replayed it until I felt sick. That afternoon, I drove into town and bought a cheap motion sensor camera from a hardware store that also sold jars of homemade jam by the register. The clerk didn't ask why I needed it. People in small towns learn not to ask questions if they don't want the answers. I mounted the camera halfway up the stairs, angled toward the upstairs hallway. I didn't tell myself it was because I wanted to catch someone. I told myself it was for peace of mind. That night the fog came early, thick as wool. The yard disappeared. Even the porch light seemed swallowed by it, haloed and weak. I sat in the living room with the lamp on, listening to the house creak and settle. My shift started in a few hours, but I couldn't bring myself to leave yet. Something about leaving felt wrong, like it would give the house permission. Around midnight, the power flickered once. Just a blink. The lamp dimmed and came back, and in that tiny interruption, the pacing started upstairs. It was immediate, like a switch had been flipped. I stood up so fast the couch cushions bounced. I stared at the staircase, my throat tight. The pacing stopped the moment my eyes locked on the darkness above. I forced myself to climb. Each step creaked under my weight, louder than anything I'd heard. Halfway up, the air changed cooler, damp. The smell of mildew grew stronger, mixed with something human and stale. At the top, the hallway was empty, but the bathroom door, which I always left closed, was cracked open. I pushed it wider with one finger. Inside, the mirror above the sink was fogged over, even though no one had showered. The fog wasn't uniform. It looked smeared, like a hand had dragged across it from the inside. And right in the center, carved clean, through the condensation, was a simple shape, 2 lines and a curve. A crude smile. I backed out so fast my shoulder hit the doorframe. Downstairs, my phone buzzed with a notification from the stair camera, motion detected. I opened the clip with shaking hands. The footage showed the staircase, grainy, black and white. At first, nothing moved. Then, from the upstairs hallway, a shadow crossed the top step. Not a full body, not a clear face. Just the lower half of someone's legs moving carefully. Toes pointed outward like they were stepping around squeaky boards. Bare feet, they paused at the top of the stairs. And then, slowly, one foot reached down, feeling for the next step, like whoever it was had been waiting for the moment I looked away. The clip ended. I didn't breathe until my chest hurt. I ran back upstairs, every board screaming under my boots, and the hallway was empty again. The bathroom mirror was still fogged. The smile was still there. But now, at the bottom edge of the mirror, where the glass met the frame, there was something else. A small smear of dirt, and a single dark hair stuck to it, long and wet, like it had been pulled from someone's head and pressed there on purpose. I left that night. I didn't pack neatly. I threw my clothes into a bag and didn't bother folding anything. I grabbed my work badge, my keys, my wallet. I didn't turn off the lights. I drove out of that hollow with my headlights cutting through fog, the road shining black with rain. Trees slid past like walls. Somewhere behind me, the house sat in the dark with its upstairs window watching the road. I never went back for the rest of my things. I told my landlord I was done and blocked his number before he could argue. For a long time afterward, I told myself it was a person, a squatter, a neighbor, someone who'd found a way into the attic or the crawl space. Someone who'd learned my schedule and enjoyed the control of being unseen. That explanation should have helped. It didn't, because I still don't know how they moved so quietly, how they stopped the moment I looked, how they made it feel like the house itself was cooperating. Sometimes, when I'm awake at night, still stuck in that night shift rhythm, I'll be sitting in my current apartment with all the lights off, trying to let my eyes adjust. And I'll hear it, not footsteps exactly. Just the soft shift of weight in the next room. The careful test of a floorboard. And the moment I turn my head toward the sound, everything goes perfectly still, like whatever learned me back in that house never really stayed behind. Like it just needed time in the dark to figure out my shape. When people ask why we bought a house so far up into the mountains, I usually give them a practical answer. Cheaper property, quiet, space to breathe. The truth is, both of us were tired of living lives that felt temporary. Apartments where you hear strangers through the walls. Leases that end just when you start to feel settled. We wanted something solid, old enough to have survived a few decades, isolated enough that the world couldn't brush up against it every day. The house sat outside a town called Pineville, Kentucky, at the end of a narrow road that turned to mud every time it rained. Fog gathered there naturally, slipping down from the ridge lines and pooling in the hollow like water in a bowl. The place had been vacant for years, according to the listing. Estate sale, the realtor said in a voice that suggested she didn't want to elaborate. From the outside, it looked tired but intact. 2 stories, weathered siding, a sagging wraparound porch that creaked even under light steps. The yard had gone wild, waist-high grass, a few collapsed fence posts, and trees that leaned close like they were curious who'd finally come back. Inside, smelled like rot that had been aired out too late. Old dust, damp wood, a faint metallic note that clung to the back of my throat. The furniture left behind was sparse and mismatched. A dining table with one leg shimmed up by folded cardboard. A couch with flattened cushions. An armoire shoved against the hallway wall like it had been moved in a hurry. The house was quiet in a way that felt earned. No hum of traffic, no distant sirens. Just wind through the trees and the occasional creak as the place adjusted to being lived in again. The first few nights were peaceful enough that I almost felt embarrassed for expecting otherwise. We slept hard, exhausted from unpacking. Rain came and went. The house groaned the way old houses do, but nothing stood out. No footsteps, no cold drafts, no sudden noises that made you sit up in bed. Then, on the 4th night, I woke up because I thought someone was standing too close to me. It wasn't a sound that woke me. It was the feeling of awareness, like when you sense someone watching without seeing them. My eyes snapped open, and the room was dark except for the faint gray light coming through the curtains. That's when I heard it, breathing, slow, even, deliberate, not in the room with us, but just outside the bedroom door. I held my breath and listened. My partner slept beside me, their back rising and falling steadily. The breathing continued, unhurried, like whoever it belonged to wasn't afraid of being caught. I told myself it was the house, pipes, air moving through walls, but it was too rhythmic, too controlled. I waited for footsteps, for the sound to move away. It didn't. After what felt like forever, but couldn't have been more than a minute, it stopped, just cut off, like someone stepping back from the door. I lay there until morning, convincing myself I'd dreamed it. The next night it happened again. Same time, same slow breathing, just beyond the door. Close enough that I could imagine the shape of someone standing there, facing the wood, listening to us sleep. This time, I nudged my partner awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. They listened, tense for a moment, then shook their head. "Hear what?" And just like that, the breathing stopped. I didn't say anything else. I didn't want to sound paranoid. We'd only been there a week. I didn't want to be the person who turned every creak into a threat. Over the next few days, I started noticing smaller things. Doors we'd closed were open again in the morning, not wide, just cracked. Lights off in rooms we'd just left. The hallway outside our bedroom felt colder at night, like the air didn't circulate properly. One afternoon, while unpacking boxes in the spare room, I found an old photo tucked into a drawer. It showed the house years earlier, porch boards intact, yard trimmed. A family stood in front of it, faces blurred by time. What caught my eye was the upstairs hallway window behind them. Someone was standing there, not posed, not waving, just standing in the dark behind the glass. I showed it to my partner, trying to keep my voice casual. They shrugged it off. Reflection, shadow, bad lighting, logical explanations. I wanted to believe them. That night I woke up again. The breathing was back, closer this time. I sat up slowly, heart pounding hard enough that I worried it would give me away. The sound came through the doorframe softly, like whoever it was had leaned closer. I stared at the door, waiting for the knob to turn. It didn't. I waited until my nerves burned out, then finally swung my legs out of bed and opened the door. The hallway was empty, dark, silent, cold. Nothing moved. No retreating footsteps, no shifting boards. I stood there longer than I should have, my skin prickling, before shutting the door again. I didn't sleep after that. The next day, I ordered security cameras. I told myself it was for peace of mind. For both of us. The house was old, the road was isolated. It made sense. But as I mounted one in the hallway, angled directly at our bedroom door, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been standing there already knew I was watching now. That night the house was quiet. Too quiet. And when I finally fell asleep, it was with the uneasy sense that something was only waiting because it wanted to be seen. The first night the cameras were running, nothing happened. No breathing, no sounds in the hallway. The house behaved like a normal, empty place again. I checked the footage in the morning, scrubbing through hours of gray night vision that showed nothing but static shadows and dust drifting through the frame. Part of me felt relieved. Another part felt watched. The second night, I woke up before the sound started. I don't know how else to explain it. My eyes opened like my body had been nudged awake, and I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening. The breathing came a few seconds later, slow, patient, right outside the door. My chest tightened. I glanced at my partner, still asleep. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't even reach for my phone. I just listened as the breathing continued, steady and unbothered. Minutes passed. The sound never wavered. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under again. In the morning, I checked the footage alone. At first, the hallway camera showed nothing unusual. The timestamp ticked forward. The grainy image stayed still. Then, at 2:11 a.m., something changed. A figure appeared in the frame, not walking in, not stepping out of a doorway, just there, standing directly in front of our bedroom door. The night vision flattened everything into shades of gray, but the shape was unmistakably human. Average height, barefoot, head slightly tilted as if listening. It didn't move. For nearly an hour, it stood there. No shifting weight, no scratching, no turning away, just standing. I felt sick watching it, my own breathing too loud in my ears. At 3:04 a.m., the figure leaned closer to the door, head tilting just a little more. like it was pressing an ear against the wood. At 3:07, it stepped back. At 3:08, it was gone. No footsteps, no fade. One frame it existed, the next it didn't. I sat there staring at the frozen screen long after the footage ended, my hands numb. When I showed my partner, they watched in silence, jaw tight. They didn't laugh. They didn't explain it away. "That's a person," they said, finally. We called the sheriff's office. An older deputy came out that afternoon, drove slowly up the road, walked the property with us. He checked doors, windows, the crawl space beneath the house. No signs of forced entry, no footprints that hadn't been blurred by rain. "Could be someone squatting nearby," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "These places stay empty long enough. People learn the habits." He suggested better locks, motion lights, keeping the cameras running. That night, we didn't sleep in the bedroom. We set up on the couch in the living room with the lights on, the TV playing quietly. I kept my phone in my hand, refreshing the camera feeds every few minutes. Around 2 a.m., the hallway camera lit up again. The figure was back. This time, it stood at the end of the hall, facing the living room, facing us. Even through the low-resolution feed, I felt the weight of that attention. The way the head angled, just slightly, as if it knew exactly where we were. It stayed there for 37 minutes. Neither of us moved. When it finally left the frame, I didn't feel relief. I felt hollowed out. We left the next morning, packed only what we needed. Left boxes unopened. Didn't argue about money or logistics. Just drove down the muddy road with the fog swallowing the house behind us. We never officially sold it. Never went back for the rest of our things. The cameras are still installed. Sometimes, against my better judgment, I check the feed. Most nights the hallway is empty, but every once in a while, around the same hour, the camera triggers, and for a few frames, something stands outside the bedroom door, perfectly still, waiting, not to come in, just to be sure someone is still sleeping on the other side. I went back into the mountains because there was nowhere else to put the grief. My grandmother's house sat outside Whitesburg, Kentucky, at the end of a narrow road that disappeared into a fog-filled hollow. People called the place quiet, but the quiet wasn't gentle. It felt alert, like the house was always listening. After she died, the responsibility of sorting through it fell to the family. I volunteered to stay a few nights, telling myself I was being helpful. Really, I wanted to exist in the space she had left behind and pretend she wasn't entirely gone. It rained the day I arrived. The porch sagged, the steps creaked in the same places they always had, and I paused at the front door with my keys in hand, already knowing the air inside would feel wrong. When I opened it, it did. The smell of damp wood, old ash, and something sweet and decaying settled around me. The living room looked untouched. Quilts folded on the couch, her armchair angled toward the window, photos lined up on the mantel like nothing had ended. The silence wasn't empty. It felt noticed. That night, while sorting boxes, I noticed the kitchen light was off. I was certain I'd left it on. I turned it back on and blamed grief. Old houses, tired minds. After midnight, I woke to a colder air and a faint sound downstairs, just enough to make me listen. In the morning, the front room door stood slightly open. I knew I hadn't opened it. I worked harder the next day, trying not to think. In the attic, among dust and old boxes, I found a spiral notebook. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. The handwriting was mine, not from childhood, current, familiar. The pages were dated yesterday and today, filled with short, factual notes. Kitchen light off again. Front room door open at 1:12 a.m. Heard movement downstairs. The last line was pressed deep into the paper. If I forget, read this. If I forget, I'll think I'm alone. That's when I heard soft footsteps beneath the attic door and saw the pull cord sway, as if someone had brushed it from below. That night, I stayed awake. At 1:12 a.m., the living room lamp clicked off by itself. The front room door stood open again. Minutes later, the lamp turned back on, steady and calm, like a response. I left the notebook open by my bed and recorded audio on my phone. Morning came with a new entry written overnight. I woke up at 1:12 again. Didn't turn the lamp on. Went downstairs. I keep thinking I hear her. Don't answer. On the recording, I heard the lamp click, slow footsteps, and then my own voice, calm and careful. I'm coming. I packed immediately and left without finishing. Before I went, I stood by my grandmother's chair. A faint thumbprint marked the armrest. I still have the notebook. Every time I read the last line, don't answer, I remember the tone of my voice on that recording. Not frightened. Careful. The tone you use when you don't want anyone else in the house to know you're leaving your room. And that's what stays with me. Not ghosts or curses. Just the idea that grief can split you in two. And one part of you will still get up in the night and go to whoever's calling. Whether it's memory loneliness or something that learned your name from the inside. I packed at first light and left the house unfinished. Before going, I stood in front of my grandmother's chair. The quilt was folded the way she always folded it. On the armrest, a faint thumbprint marked the dust. I hadn't touched it. Fog swallowed the house as I drove out. I told myself distance would fix it. It didn't. I brought the notebook, sealed it in a bag, and hid it in my drawer. For weeks, nothing happened. I slept poorly, but I slept. Then one night, I woke at 1:12 a.m. The apartment was too still, the air heavy. A soft sound drifted from the hallway. Not a knock, not a voice, just movement. Then I heard it. My own voice, soft and calm, from just outside my door. I'm coming? I froze. I hadn't spoken. The handle turned slowly. The door creaked open just enough to spill darkness across the floor. I didn't see anyone, but I felt it. Patient, familiar, something that had learned the shape of my body. The sound of my breath, waiting for me to finish what I had started. Morning brought the notebook. Out of the drawer, open, a new entry in my handwriting. You don't have to remember anymore. I'll go for you. I burned the notebook, watched it curl, blacken, and vanish. But late at night, when the apartment is silent and my breath feels too loud, I wake with the same cold certainty. Something inside me still moves. And one night, when I finally stop listening, it will rise without a sound, turn the handle, and answer the voice that calls my name, using my own.
If today's story touched a quiet corner of your heart, if for a moment you felt like someone was standing close to you, then remember you are not alone. To hear more terrifying whisper in the depth of the night, subscribe to our channel Nightmare Whisper, because every story is not just about fear. It leaves behind a feeling. Thanks for watching. And one more thing, we'll meet again tomorrow night when the darkness has grown a little deeper.